Welcome to this flashback episode of the Lawyer Life podcast, brought to you by my family vacation in the Sunshine State. This week, we flash all the way back to September of 2018, when Darlene and I were asking ourselves, how does fear affect the practice of law? Fun programming note, this episode marked the true launch of the Lawyer Life podcast, so fear was quite a natural subject for Darlene and I to chat about. We'll be back next week with a new episode, as always, when we chat less stress and more fulfillment. Talk soon. Welcome to LLP, a podcast for lawyers. Each week we cover a topic to help ourselves and other lawyers navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. On today's episode, we're talking about fear. We're asking ourselves, is being scared actually a good thing at times? I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hi, Darlene. Boo. Did I scare you?
You did, actually. I'm always watching for what you're going to do in that intro hello and wondering what it will be.
I'm sure people hate it, but it's part of the DNA of the thing now. So, we just can't go back. It's impossible. I have to say hi to you in a tacky way every time we talk.
I'm totally fine with that.
I know that I griped a couple episodes ago about early Halloween, but by the time this guy goes up, we won't be too far away. So it's an appropriate subject. It'll be like, kind of a month away when people are starting to get their costumes ready. So we're talking about fear and being scared.
Slightly different than Halloween level fear.
Oh, I thought we were just going to talk about Halloween today on the podcast. Like,
we could do that.
Are you going to be a ghost? Are you going to be a skeleton?
I want to dress up. My favorite costume of all time was my husband and I went as Axel and Slash, and we really went all out for the Guns N' Roses costume. We had the snake, we had the top hat, we had a plastic guitar, the bandana. It was so great.
Yeah, that's good. Have you seen Coco, that movie?
No.
Oh, it's a good watch around Halloween. It's good. It's animated. It's like a kid's movie, but it's probably too scary for your kids your age. Anyway, okay. So we're talking about fear and being scared as lawyers. Why is this something important to talk about today?
Well, I introduced this topic because when I woke up this morning, I felt fear. And I will trace that fear to the fact that we are actually launching this podcast publicly, as opposed to just doing it for 9 episodes for fun to see if we can podcast.
We've had a series of insiders who have been watching or listening during the soft launch period. And so, they got the inside scoop on this thing, but we're going to have hopefully some more people join us as we actually start to promote this baby. And so, yeah, I think it's natural. We're putting ourselves out there a little bit. Natural to be scared.
I think we're putting ourselves out there for sure, in that our personalities are going to be more evident, but also just this is not the norm, I don't think, for communications as lawyers, talking honestly about fears, mistakes, worries about making a mistake, the types of things that I know from anecdotal conversation plague everybody in the profession, or maybe not everybody. Perhaps there are some people for whom this will not resonate, but we are really speaking to people for whom it will. And it gives me a little bit of pause. But part of what we talked about when deciding to do this was we wanted to feel that, because that's what our creative clients feel when we're helping them launch something. And it is not to be taken lightly. And I'm definitely feeling that today.
The other thing I was worried about is that I had to get my dog Rosie to sign a release for all the health information.
Exactly.
We revealed so much health information about her that's personal on this podcast. So we negotiated over a period of weeks. We finally, landed 5 treats in exchange for the signature on the release form. So I'm excited about that. That was hanging over my head.
That Rosie and her tough negotiating skills.
It's sometimes she just sits there and doesn't even say a word, and it's hard. Wow. It's hard. It's like negotiating with a dog at times.
Wow, it would be much like that. Yes, and you're like, 1 treat, no, 2 treats. Okay, 5. Yeah. That's it.
You have to catch her when she's hungry. That's what I've learned. It's a good lesson in negotiation. Okay. Yeah. And so here we are. We both wake up this morning in terror because we're going to ask people to listen to this thing this that we've just been putting online for the past couple of weeks, I guess a couple months. And why is it, do you think, perhaps, what is fear? Why is it good to be scared? That's what we're trying to accomplish today. What are we understanding to be fear? Maybe first.
Well, I think I said on an earlier podcast, which people can listen back to now that we're going out there. I did say
you're going to listen to the whole catalog, book off your weekend, get your listening ears ready.
Get it going. In an earlier episode, I said that Tony Robbins had called fear type A people's form of stress, or word for stress. Or sorry, stress is type A people's word for fear. And I think that is a big part of it. I also think that it's just the unknown. I have a magnet on my fridge that says life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And for me, that has been so true. It's just, if I'm comfortable, it's okay. But I really almost thrive at this point on being in a position of a little bit of discomfort, because I just think if I'm comfortable, it means I'm not pushing myself.
Yeah. I like that unknown bit. That's like why Jaws was so good. And people always say Jaws is like a monster movie, thrives so much because you don't see the shark for such a long time. And it's just kind of hanging out there. And so then your imagination can make it seem bigger or scarier than it really is. And I think that happens to us in the profession a lot, where, whether it is actually in, the legal work, or perhaps in undertaking a brand new endeavor, like making a legal podcast. If you don't know what the thing is and you haven't, gone through the cycle of it, once before, it can seem a lot more intimidating and scary than perhaps it is when, the shark emerges from the water and you're like, okay, we can kill that thing.
But I think it's one of the things in our profession is this idea that really what we're up against is nobody talks about that. So everybody sits in their office being worried about it. There's a deep culture within, every organization. And I think this is somehow, it's important that we have it. It's important that we have a healthy fear of making a mistake, which keeps us trying to do our best at all times. That is not, I don't think, something that we should be worried about. I think that's paranoia. Productive paranoia. I think that's right. I think that makes good sense. And I think that an employee or a lawyer who is concerned or cares about not making a mistake, that is totally great, in my opinion. I just think that where the problem comes in is this idea, fake, that no one makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. I think you should definitely avoid making a mistake. I think you should be mindful of it. I think you should be always considering how to best give your, most excellent advice. But you shouldn't be sitting in your office thinking, oh my God, no one ever makes mistakes in this profession. If I make one, it means ... Insert self-defeating statement here.
I got some great advice in the first couple years of my career. And I honestly don't know if I read it somewhere or if someone told it to me. So credit to somebody who I am apologizing to. And they said, when you sit down and you're about to work on a project, you need to figure out if you're building a shed or if you're building a grand piano. And that should inform, how, in this case, how scared you are, what your productive paranoia levels should be. If you're building a shed and you understand that it's, just to throw some crap into and it's going to live outside, and if it falls down in 3 years, that's okay. Then obviously you're not going to be as diligent as you are, building the grand piano, where at the tiniest mistake could be of such an incredible consequence. And that frames up a lot of the conversations that I lead with clients, is to understand what they're looking for me to build, and having a conversation about the risks inherent in, like, if this is a shed, this is what it looks like. And that's been helpful for me, because not everybody doesn't always want you to build a grand piano. And it's sometimes the projects don't call for that. And it would be ridiculous, because you're going to be charging someone 5 or 6 or 7 times the cost that they otherwise can want you to be spending on it.
Well, and sometimes the advice then gets watered down because it's so worried about covering, the lawyer, less about the client. I think that's something as a profession we can move towards improvement on. Maybe the more we talk about stuff like this, I think it's, we don't need to impose this fear on our clients. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
can try to deal with it in ourselves. And this is kind of what I'm talking about in the next stage of where I'm going with our blog that we sometimes reference in this podcast. But I'm going to be talking about, you know, why does it matter to deal with all this stuff? Like, first of all, we talk about it honestly. We put ourselves out there. We say, okay, yep, we have some fears sometimes, and that's okay. And you know, we have to deal with them, and doing so will make us better lawyers. And my personal view, which will come out in the next blog series, is the world is very much changing. I mean, we all have almost, you know, full access to information now. So we have to get so much better about dealing with our tools to analyze all that information, like our wisdom, our getting ourselves out of the way, improving our mental game, improving our resilience. This stuff is all absolutely fundamental to where our profession is going. So I don't think that talking about this is just a, you know, it's not just a share session. It's not a group counseling session.
I'm
Although I
lying down
always
on my
feel
couch right now, so comfortable.
you and Rosie,
Got my
yeah, I
Kleenex
do feel
beside me.
strangely better after these podcasts. Hopefully, other people do too. But anyway, I think it's an important topic to talk about. So, what was your when you started practicing? What was your biggest fear, or what came up for you? Where did you hit fear first? Maybe.
Yeah, so I think it was part of everything that I did for the first at least, man, year of my job, I suppose. Like I didn't specialize straight out when after I was called, and I started out as a generalist, so that was very difficult, and still proves to be to a degree today when. You're having to not just learn because you're starting out, but also learn up to like a dozen different areas of law as you're actually, as they say, you're building the plane as you're flying it. Like that's what I was doing, but also learning how to build a plane to begin with. So it was yeah, certainly challenging. Happily, of course, the way that this practice works is that there's a number of experts that you can call on for when you get to the really complicated stuff. But there is that level of work that I was expected to do from the outset, and just as every new lawyer is, and that's very difficult for a number of reasons. Number one, you're still learning, and number two, there's an expectation that you are good and that you know what you're doing, because no one goes to somebody for an answer unless they think that person has the answer. And number three, you're beginning a new profession, and so there's so much stress because you're starting to build a reputation, right? And every step you take, leads you, at least it feels, down a direction that that reputation is being solidified. So there's a number of pressures that come along, and I would say that it was normal for me to be very, I suppose, scared or to have fear about whether this was the right way to do things or the right way to word things, and am I creating something that isn't right? And that's can be helpful. It definitely motivates you to learn and check and double check and triple check, but also it wears on a person, I'd say.
Do you think that you and I are just more afraid than the average lawyer, or do you hear
No,
this in your circles as well?
no way. Yeah, I don't think that we're unique. I think that it would be. I don't want to support the fear. I don't want it to make it seem like it's imperative and that you can't be successful without it. But if I just waltzed into my first year practicing law and was overconfident and wasn't motivated by the things I just outlined, I think I would have made more mistakes, and that could have consequences that would be possibly bad for me or for my clients. And so I think it's important. I think it's something that nearly every new lawyer must deal with. And I frankly don't see how they couldn't. Like, do you see a way that you could start out in this profession and not be scared?
Definitely not. And I do think, I mean, we were told, I was a student at two large law firms, and we were told at one of them, which I thought was amazing, almost the first week, we were told, look, if you make a mistake, please tell someone immediately. Do not be a hero. Never think that, what we don't want to know or that you should try to cover it up. We expect that as a student, you are learning, and we want to know everything that happens. And I thought that was just brilliant. And it set the right tone for us. And I don't know how often people, went and reported things. But the culture from that minute was at least set up. And then it was up to the individual person to figure out if that spoke to them and if they would do that. But maybe firms are even better about saying that today. I don't know. But I did think that at the time that was a positive move. And as far as the fears, I mean, I definitely felt the fear of not doing. I didn't feel the fear of not having the answer, because I did understand that there was some level of, sometimes the lawyer knew the answer and wanted to see, how your research skills were, or they wanted you to just do the work. And I've spoken before on this podcast about one situation in which I did get the answer wrong because of a wrong assumption right at the beginning of a very long memo. And that was an absolutely formative experience. And I will never want to have the feeling that I felt that day ever again. If that never shows up again, I would be very happy. But I didn't take it to mean that I couldn't practice law. I took it to mean, and this is the way that the partner explained it to me. They said, we're taking the time to teach you this because it's an important skill. It's a normal thing for a new lawyer to do, and don't do it again. And, it was mentoring, and that's part of our profession.
I was just going to say, that's it's me. It's the same as my daughter learning to walk and me letting her walk, but be ready to catch her, right? If she's falling off a ledge. And so that is, I think, the really important way to support somebody who is starting out, who is experiencing that fear. At least they have somebody that is the safety net, right? But not everybody has the safety net. Not everybody is in the environment of, a formal, larger firm structure where you're an associate who gets an assignment from a senior partner. And then, in the example you've given, and I had the same, sort of experiences, you then sit in a chair across from them and explain your whole rationale and go through the thing. There's some people who don't have that direct access and just have to do the work and trust themselves. And that is, that's the tightrope walking, I guess, scenario or whatever. That's a lot tougher and more fear inducing. And so I think as professionals who are in years in and maybe more comfortable, it is something that I think we should focus on, of reaching out to younger people in the profession and making sure that, you're letting know, I'm a phone call away if you just need, a second set of ears. Or I don't think people say that. Second set of eyes. Another brain on this. Whatever is the thing that people say that I'm not finding.
Another brain is good.
Yeah. Do people actually say that, Darlene?
They do. Yes, yeah? Definitely. Okay. They say second set of eyes. I don't think they say second set of ears, but that's appropriate for a podcast. So that's totally fine. You're in podcast mode.
Mike.
The one thing I would say too is that I was I believe that when you're doing high level work, or you're doing difficult files, or you're doing something new, really, I spend a lot of time in my practice doing new things. There's no obvious answer. There's not the case on point. The issue's never been dealt with. The technology didn't exist before. The issues are dealt with 5 years after you're trying to deal with them properly for a new technology company or a startup. And I find I've developed a certain level of peace around that, and just to say, okay, I'm doing interesting, complex, and I hate the word complex because, I have a gripe. I just thought of a gripe.
Oh, okay. Write it down.
Remind me. I have some trouble thinking of grapes. So we always do goods and grapes at the end of this podcast. So I have a gripe about complex. So I will not use that word. But when you're doing things that are worthwhile and you care about them, and you're putting yourself out there to the max for a client, I don't think you can do it without feeling fear. I don't think that people, Eddie Vedder doesn't go on stage at the O2 in London without feeling butterflies for the first many years of his career, for example. If you're doing something really worthwhile with a big impact, it's going to feel scary. And if it doesn't, maybe you're not aiming high enough.
Yeah. And that's part of the magic, right? Like the rock star example, I think, is a great one, because once it stops becoming interesting, that's a horrible word too.
and overused
Once you're
on our
not
podcast.
motivated by getting on stage and it just becomes normal to be in front of 20,000 or 100,000 people, I would hazard to guess, not being in that situation, believe it or not, but I would hazard to guess that you kind of feel like you need to hang them up at that point. That if you're, and that's just evidence that you need to keep kind of, pushing yourself to get to new places so you can experience those butterflies and really feel alive in the work you're doing. So there is a good side to this sort of thing. It seems to be.
I think so. And there is a good documentary on the Foo Fighters on Netflix that I recommend on that point. It shows, even though Dave Grohl, lead singer of the Foo Fighters, was the drummer in Nirvana, he still had to build his band from scratch afterwards and prove himself. And he started in small venues and they toured like 9 months a year or something. And then the trajectory of the documentary is to show how they got to bigger and bigger venues and how he felt beforehand and how he pumped himself up. And, not unlike, although on a much bigger scale than some of the things we do, like a negotiation, it has the same effect personally, because that's what he's supposed to be doing. And my whole thing is, I believe I'm supposed to be doing law and these negotiations and helping clients achieve results. And it's worth it then for me to feel afraid on their behalf, or, putting myself out there, taking a risk, or not knowing what the answer will be, because you don't really. And lawyers aren't so good with not knowing the answer to things.
No, but I think what the fear does, at least for me in the examples that you're giving, is drives you to have to be prepared, right? And that's to the extent the most you can do a lot of the time. And I take my level of anxiety or fear, whatever, is often lowered when I'm just like, I'm ready. Like I have it. I know what the deal is here. And
you're controlling the controllables, which is your own piece.
Totally.
That makes sense.
So another reason why fear is good potentially, I think and you touched on this as well. It's so interesting to come from, this background in law school, which I think you've said before, or I said it, just basically like takes any risk tolerance you ever might have had and just lowers it to zero. And what I have found is the more I work with entrepreneurs and really enterprising people who accept that risk is part of, effectively anything, and are just so brave in the face of that, it's really incredible to see those people do so well. And I think that what's interesting is that it certainly has brought me up from that zero that law school installed in me, to understand that, fear, risk, all those things are just, part of the rules of the game, basically. And it's motivating.
Well, and it's useful too when you see that risk management and risk tolerance doesn't always lead to success as a company.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that I've seen over and over, is that companies take a lot of risks. I mean, Amazon, for example, one of the biggest companies, they have taken a lot of risks. They didn't get there because they're, shying away from every possible new thing that could be scary. They're putting drones out doing deliveries. They're buying grocery chains. These are not all easy decisions. Like Starbucks gives health employees or health insurance to all their employees. That's very unusual in the States. Or I guess at that tier, if you read the Howard Schultz stuff that he's written.
And he is a very interesting risk taker as well. Like I know that the second time he came on as CEO, one of the first two things he did, from what I recall, was number one, close every Starbucks. I think it was from like 10 o'clock onward on a certain day. All staff were in and retrained. And so like the cost when they weren't doing well, the cost of not only paying for the employees to be there, but not bringing revenue for those full days across all of the stores, huge risk. And then also, I think he brought in every store manager to like an arena in Seattle or something like that and address them, to basically give them the State of the Union when they were not doing well, and laid it bare for them, which is also risky and financially risky. Also, there's the way that he really laid out what was going on and basically said, if we operate as is, in 6 months we're going to be done. Anyway, he's a very unique and interesting risk taker, and somebody who certainly does, going back to our other episode, seem to go his own way. And to his credit, obviously it's worked out well.
I find it funny that you and I seem to read the same books, even though it's kind of random to have read the Howard Schultz, all the stuff that he's published.
You give me too much credit, Darlene. I listened to a podcast.
Oh, podcast. Okay. None of these books. This is a hangover for old people like me. It is good. I mean, one of the things, just to sort of tie together the Howard Schultz and the Amazon, I think for me, what's been helpful is reading about a lot of entrepreneurs, even Ted Rogers here in Canada, a local example. Most people look at him at the end of his career, but his biography is a very interesting book because it talks about the trajectory that he had. Even though he came from a well-off background, he still mortgaged his house twice to, get Rogers to where it was, to buy Fido, or to get into the cell phone space. There were all kinds of turning points where he definitely was not doing the safe, comfortable thing or resting on his laurels. And I tend to admire those stories. So they give me a little bit of comfort.
One of my favorite biographies is Muhammad Ali's, and he was known for, being, people would say arrogant, right? Because he would go into a fight and say, I'm going to knock him out in the 4th round. And people just thought that was him being arrogant. But what you come to learn in the book was that he actually used that as the motivator to train, because he was basically instilled fear in himself and set a goal that was so difficult that he knew he would work harder to get there. So he basically put these goalposts out there publicly to say, this is who I am and this is how successful I'll be. So he was then intrinsically motivated to get there. So I'm so interested in that practice. And I see it a lot in businesses where setting a, we need this to launch by X date might not only be about because we need it out financially for that reason. It might actually be because we just want to really push people and make sure that we're doing something better than we otherwise might have, stretching it out over a longer period of time. So I think, it's an interesting practice to try to use fear as a motivator.
Definitely. And I think we're doing that, putting this podcast out. It's so, now it's out there. Now I don't know. Yeah. It's one thing to do things without telling all your friends you're doing them and asking for feedback. And my friends will be kind enough to give me authentic and honest feedback. I'm certain of that. I require it of them and of anyone else who listens to this, by the way, which we should say.
She requires it. It's a condition to your listening.
It is a condition of my friendship when we enter into our agreements. The one thing I would say,
I'm so happy to meet you at this cocktail party. Do you mind signing this little?
Could you just sign right here?
I call it an FA. It's a friendship agreement.
A friend DA. I've heard that. We could. Oh my God, so nerdy. Strong theme of nerdiness in this podcast, but I think that's okay.
Yeah, there's got to be.
The one thing I would say too is that there was a really brave guy at my old workplace. And he was the same guy who used to come to the legal department and say, hey, can you just print me out a contract, Darlene? That was annoying, but funny, kind of funny. And then the second thing that he would say was, what would you do if you weren't afraid today? And I thought about it a lot because I was in charge of doing new licensing and no blueprint, just kind of figuring out what might work and trying to put things out there that would be transformative for the industry. And it was scary. That was definitely not comfortable work. But his statement is part of my life now. I think about it all the time. And often it does change my calculus of what I'm going to do. I'm feeling afraid. I should probably do it anyway. And in fact, there's that quote that says, all that you ever dreamed is on the other side of fear or something. I don't know. A theme of this podcast is me getting quotes wrong.
Well, me too. We're all waiting.
Well, it's
Did you ever hear about this one thing? Yeah.
It's so this quote, I realized too that anyway, there are mistakes in here, but that's part of the DNA of the podcast, as you said. So have you heard that quote before? What would you do if you weren't afraid? I don't know if that was him or if that's a famous quote. I have no idea.
No, I like it though. Yeah.
The other thing that is relevant to this topic, and in preparing for today and thinking about fear, I listened to a podcast called Facing Fear of Rejection podcast on The Brendan Show. It's a guy called Brendan Burchard. He wrote a book called The Motivation Manifesto, which is excellent. And he says, when you are feeling afraid, what you need to do is take the next right action of integrity. So don't be afraid of rejection. Don't, watch what your fear is telling you not to do and see if it's holding you back from something that is actually, integral to who you are. And for me, that's why I feel fear about the podcast, but I put it out because I believe it's important, because I think it's tied to where I think the world's conversation needs to go. And, it makes sense to me. So when I put it up against that standard of like, take the next act of integrity, it fits. So I wouldn't necessarily just advocate blindly rushing into fear in a way that doesn't do that. But I thought that was a useful way to think about it.
Yeah, that's very good.
It could have been could have saved it. Should we go to goods?
We will go to goods, but of course we will do so after this. The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law, experienced legal counsel when and where you need us. To learn more about Inter Alia, visit the website. That's spelled INTERALIA-law.com. Thank you. I think that might have been your best segue in all of our podcasts yet.
It might be my only one. I was thinking. I don't know that I've successfully made any segues.
The only segue that I made have been extremely corny, I think.
The talented broadcaster on this podcast is you. I am merely here to fill out the time and
Yikes.
Find the jokes funny. Anyway.
I don't know but that's kind of you to say. I don't know how true it is. Goods and gripes, we do every episode. Goods are things that we want to promote. Gripes are things that we find annoying. Small things mostly, but sometimes Darlene talks about the fate of the world as a gripe. So anyway, do you have a good, Darlene?
I have a good and a gripe. I'm so excited. I have a really consistent with my A+, yay. Consistent with my earlier or with my focus on happiness and joy in life. I do have a hard time thinking of gripes. But I have one. This is a long-standing gripe, and it has to do with the use of the word complex in lawyer bios on websites.
Oh,
I want this to stop. I do. As a profession, I assume if I am going to a large law firm to handle my matter, I do not need you to tell me that the matters you handle are complex. And I will throw myself on the sword here and say, I did it myself on this podcast. So I know how tempting it can be to define the matters that we all work on as complex. They are, but I don't think now that I've said this, you will note this when you go.
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's my gripe. And my good, I even started with a gripe. That for me is big. My good is in Canada, we have the Polaris Prize, which happened this week. And we always try to talk a little bit about music, media, mixed with law on this podcast. So the Polaris Prize was won by a classical artist named Jeremy Dutcher, who rescued a whole bunch of like wax cylinder recordings of his indigenous ancestors' music from like hundreds of years ago. Mm-hmm. And the music is really excellent and fascinating and just such a cool, it just makes me happy to live in a place where there's a prize for that, first of all, where there's a room full of music industry execs and people who generally focus on more, what's going to be a hit. And they award the prize by vote to this music. And it's good music. It's really good to work to. And it's a learning experience. So That's my good.
I was working to it this morning, and I think he said in his speech, which I think is true and exciting, is that Canada is now watching an Indigenous Renaissance, and that which is fascinating. And I think it's like our duty to continue to seek out and support artists like this. A Tribe Called Red has been one of the most well-known Indigenous acts out of Canada for the last couple of years. I remember 2010, so when I started law school in Ottawa, they had just started electric powwow at a bar called Babylon that we went to often, and that was something that it was an incredible thing to find, and then an incredible thing to attend every I think it was once a month at that time, and still to a degree is. So anyway, I think to the extent we can support Indigenous folks who are making incredible art and other things, it's beholden on us in a way that we can enrich our lives too. Great, good.
Your turn.
Okay. I have a small gripe that I just realized, and then I have a goody gripe. Is it
grammar related?
No, it's totally not grammar related.
Okay, we're branching out.
And I don't expect you to have much feedback on it because it's a unique experience. But the past 2 toasters that I've had don't lock down when I put the bread down. And I have to hold it for like 5 or 10 seconds, and sometimes it then locks.
Wow.
It's the most gripey thing I think I've ever experienced. It's like really, not enough to really do something to fix until it like doesn't stay down at all.
You could buy a new toaster.
I know, but that's what we did the first one, and now the second one is doing it. And it's also like, anyway, that's a grape. Goody grapey.
This is a message to you to stop eating toast. Maybe.
I can't do that.
No? Okay, no. Fair enough.
I really love, and we buy like this great local bread. That's just great. That's I can't. The goody grapey I have, which might surprise some folks, is birthdays. Your own personal birthday. I just had a birthday. That was mine. I love other people's birthdays. Thank you. It's important birthdays. To support other people's birthdays. I love celebrating other people's birthdays, but I'm conflicted with my own birthday.
Why?
Because obviously it's fun and good to like have a birthday. And I think people know those reasons. But I'm a bit gripey about it because I don't like the imposition on people to like come to the thing or get you a thing, and that makes me feel awkward. So it's a goody gripey. I'm conflicted about it.
Well, I can appreciate that. I just think that for women anyway, there's a strong emphasis on not indicating how old you are after a certain age. And, I find that as I get older, a lot of women are like, oh, it's my birthday. Let's not celebrate. I don't want to get older. I do not support that at all. I think, age is great in that you develop wisdom and there's all different value at all different stages of life. So I'm very open about that. And I think that it's good to celebrate every year personally, another milestone, another year, ideally a year in which your health is good, your family's good, life is good. But I totally appreciate that other people don't need to be looped on that or make it all about like a big celebration. However, I love when, I get to just be reminded to celebrate friendships and stuff like that. So yes. I think it's, I can see the goody gripey. And maybe you just don't like being the center of attention so much.
That's probably it too. Speaking of the whole lying about your age thing though, very quickly, one of my neighbors was at the thing that we had, and she came up to me and she's like, how old are you? And I said 34. And she's like, 34 going on. And I was like, no, I'm 34. And
okay.
Like hurt me.
Like how old going on 82? Like yeah, what is she talking about?
Or and she thought I was lying about my age.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I didn't get that at all. I thought she was trying to indicate that you are more mature than your young years suggest.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But then I was like, I had to tell her the year I was born to make it seem credible. Anyway, so maybe that led to my birthday gripe as well. Okay.
I'm just thinking about the year that you were born, and I'm thinking, I need to confine my 80s references to after.
or just make them specific to like cartoons.
Okay, done. I can do that. I think one of the things on this, on our recording and on our topics is we're trying to bring the your perspective at 34 with mine, 42. So let's just get it out there. I said I'm fine with age, but that's the age. And I think that it's useful because I've got, I'm coming at the perspective a little bit from later in my career, and you're coming at it from your 2014 call.
Yeah, which is later than most people my age, but I had a career before I went into law. So I'm even younger than that in the law sense. I'm
It's true. You're like a law baby.
I'm a little law baby.
I don't think that's a thing.
Gosh. No one's listening at this point.
Nor
so
are
it's
you
okay.
a baby. No one's listening. It's fine. Okay. Anyway, thank you for today. This is good.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll talk again next week.
Sounds good. Talk to you then.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.